Under the burning sun of a Montana summer, the hills stood still, quiet, peaceful, almost unaware of what was coming. But that silence was not serenity. It was the deep breath before a storm, one that would explode into one of the greatest military disasters in American history. By nightfall, these gentle slopes, once home to migrating buffalo herds, would be drenched in blood, and the name Custer would be forever tied to defeat. History books call it Custer's Last Stand, a tale of doomed bravery, but they rarely tell the other side, the full, untamed story of those who made that stand his last. The warriors, the tacticians, the visionaries of the Lakota Nation. This is their story, a battle not just won with arrows and rifles, but with unity, strategy, and unshakable resolve. A moment when indigenous warriors shattered the myth of white invincibility and reminded the world that this land was never theirs to take. For the long years leading up to the climactic clash of 1876, tensions between the U.S. government and the Lakota Sioux tribes had escalated to an irreconcilable point, beyond any hope of peaceful reconciliation. The deep-seated fundamental root of this predestined conflict lay in the relentless, often brutal, expansionist policies of the United States. These policies were fueled by a dangerous ideology known as manifest destiny, a blind, arrogant conviction that the conquest of the entire continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, was a divine right, a God-given obligation for white Americans. This belief system led to an unceasing aggressive encroachment upon the ancestral territories of Native American tribes. It systematically and brazenly violated treaties signed only a few years prior, pushing these sovereign nations into an increasingly desperate situation where their very existence was imperiled. The most explosive event, the spark that ignited full-scale war, was the discovery of gold in the Black Hills, the most sacred mountain range, the spiritual heartland for the Lakota people. The Black Hills were not merely a resource-rich area. They were the core of their spiritual universe, the resting place of their ancestors, the abode of spirits, and the source of inspiration for their most sacred ceremonies. The gold discovery triggered an unstoppable flood of eager settlers, reckless prospectors, and opportunistic adventurers, all pouring into the region under the tacit approval and often overt encouragement of the U.S. government. This unequivocally demonstrated that Washington's promises regarding native land sovereignty were nothing more than worthless pieces of paper, easily discarded when immense economic gain beckoned. This event painfully underscored a harsh, undeniable truth. To the federal government, native lands were not sacred territories or the property of a sovereign people, but merely resources awaiting exploitation. Treaties in this context were temporary instruments to be exploited or annulled at any moment to serve expansionist goals. Faced with this perilous make-or-break situation, several truly great Lakota leaders rose to prominence, not only with military prowess, but with profound strategic vision and an unyielding spirit. Sitting Bull, the revered Hunkpapa Lakota chief, spiritual guide, and powerful shaman, steadfastly rejected the hollow, deceitful promises of the treaty. He was a man of profound wisdom and far-reaching foresight, deeply believing that upholding the ancient traditions, cultural identity, and absolute freedom of his tribe was paramount, the very foundation for their survival as a people. More than just a formidable warrior, he was a shaman, a holy man capable of foreseeing the future through sacred visions and rituals, offering deep spiritual counsel to his tribe, providing faith and hope during their darkest hours. Alongside him stood Crazy Horse, a fierce and utterly fearless Oglala Lakota warrior, renowned for his extraordinary courage, his audaciousness in battle, and his exceptional military genius. Crazy Horse was a man of few words, humble, yet possessing a powerful charisma and an innate leadership on the battlefield. He invariably led from the front in every engagement, regardless of danger, inspiring other warriors with his indomitable spirit and breathtaking valor. And Gall, a brilliant, cunning strategist with iron resolve, was another Hunkpapa chief, Sitting Bull's indispensable right-hand man. Gall distinguished himself with his robust physical presence, outstanding military organizational skills, and sharp analytical mind. He possessed an uncanny ability to read the battlefield with uncanny precision and make swift, effective tactical decisions, often anticipating enemy movements. Together, they resolutely refused to surrender their freedom, their identity, and their ancestral lands. Instead, they forged an unprecedented powerful alliance. Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, bound not only by their shared animosity toward the common enemy, but by a deep-seated conviction that their land, their people, and their traditional way of life were worth fighting for to the absolute end, never to yield. This coalition was more than a mere military consolidation. It was a potent symbol of unity against a common foe, transcending minor inter-tribal differences to defend a higher purpose, the very survival of all indigenous peoples across the vast plains. By the spring of 1876, this formidable alliance had swelled to an astonishing degree, drawing together thousands of seasoned, battle-hardened warriors. Thousands roamed the plains, answering the call of resistance, not merely as professional fighters, but as protectors of their families, fathers, sons, and brothers willing to sacrifice everything to safeguard what they cherished most. Ancient rituals, powerful war dances, and sacred prayers were performed to prepare for the inevitable confrontation, fortifying the spirits and faith of the entire alliance. Yet in Washington, D.C., at the heart of U.S. power, the military campaign had officially commenced, meticulously planned and calculated. President Ulysses S. Grant, under immense pressure from gold prospectors and politicians eager for territorial expansion, issued a cruel and illogical ultimatum. All Native groups must return to designated reservations by January of that year, failing which they would be deemed hostile and treated as rebels. This was an utterly impossible demand, issued in the midst of the harshest winter, when moving thousands of people, including women, children, and the elderly, across vast, snow-covered, freezing lands was an insurmountable feat. This demand was clearly designed to provoke, intended to manufacture a pretext for full-scale war, a cleansing campaign aimed at eradicating Native resistance once and for all, and it achieved its devastating objective. In response to this brazen challenge, the U.S. Army prepared for an all-out war, and the man chosen to lead the vanguard of this attack was George Armstrong Custer, a complex, contradictory figure, a Civil War Union hero who had become a notorious Indian fighter. Custer was a flamboyant, ambitious, and at times reckless young cavalry general from the American Civil War. He had tasted glory during the Civil War, renowned for his daring bravery, but also criticized for his lack of caution and occasional insubordination. Now he sought to reclaim that glory on the western frontier, yearning for a resounding victory to elevate his reputation and potentially pave the way for a promising political career. Custer genuinely believed he could easily defeat the native tribes, whom he regarded as disorganized savages lacking discipline and easily overwhelmed by modern military might. He viewed this war as a golden opportunity to prove himself a national hero, a protector of civilization against native barbarism. He disastrously underestimated the intelligence, fighting skills, and sheer determination of his adversaries. What he did not know and could not have possibly foreseen was that his final campaign would not be inscribed as a glorious victory, but as a tragic warning, an eternal symbol of hubris, contempt for one's opponent, and the inevitable catastrophe that ensues from underestimating one's foe. Fate had ordained a tragic end for Custer, and that fate would be penned not by those who had lauded him, but by the very people he had scorned and sought to eradicate. It was the morning of June 25th, a day destined to be etched in infamy. From the bluffs overlooking the Little Bighorn River, Custer and his native scouts, including Arikara and Crow warriors, tribes with long-standing animosity toward the Lakota and Cheyenne, cast their gaze upon an encampment of astonishing scale. Teepees stretched for miles, blanketing a significant portion of the valley. Thin smoke plumes ascended from countless cook fires, and thousands of native horses grazed peacefully, creating a serene yet deceptively powerful scene. It was the largest native gathering in the entire history of indigenous peoples on the North American continent, a force estimated at over 8,000 individuals, including approximately 1,500 to 2,000 seasoned, battle-hardened warriors, veterans of countless skirmishes, meticulously prepared for war. But Custer, with his limited vision and boundless arrogance, saw only opportunity, not danger. He severely underestimated the sheer size, unity, and fighting capabilities of the native forces, convinced that they were a disorganized rabble easily defeated. He believed that a sudden, audacious attack would cause them to scatter in panic, blatantly disregarding explicit orders from his superiors, which mandated him to await reinforcements from General Alfred Terry and Colonel John Gibbon for a coordinated attack. Custer unilaterally decided to divide his command into 3 wings for a simultaneous assault. This was a fundamental tactical error, a reckless decision born from an insatiable craving for glory and a dangerous lack of practical experience in large-scale warfare against organized tribes. One unit, under Major Marcus Reno, would attack from the south, aiming to exert pressure and distract the tribal warriors while Custer swung around to their rear. Another unit, under Captain Frederick Benteen, would sweep wide from the west, cutting off escape routes and providing supporting fire, simultaneously searching for a valley believed to contain other native camps. And Custer himself would lead his remaining 5 companies, approximately 210 men, in a direct assault from the north, where he believed he would find fleeing women, children, and elders, easy to capture, and thereby compel the warriors to surrender to protect their families. It was a strategy audacious to the point of sheer recklessness, predicated on an overinflated belief in his own abilities and a profound contempt for his adversaries. But blind audacity does not win wars. Intelligent strategy, unwavering tenacity, and adaptability do. The Lakota and Cheyenne were certainly no strangers to warfare. They had fought against hostile tribes and against white invaders for centuries, honing their combat skills and developing sophisticated tactics, particularly their agile horsemanship in battle. Their strength lay in their incredible speed, their intimate knowledge of the local terrain, and the tightly knit unity among their chiefs and warriors. Crazy Horse, ever the far-sighted visionary, urged the warriors not to wait. He had seen the dangerous fragmentation within Custer's cavalry formation, the blatant arrogance embedded in the enemy's attack plan. He knew that Custer's decision to divide his forces was a fatal blunder, creating a golden opportunity to defeat them piece by piece. And then, without a moment's hesitation, he struck. As Custer led his weary and increasingly demoralized men down a gentle slope toward the Little Bighorn, he still believed victory was within his grasp, or, at the very least, that he could achieve some decisive feat to salvage the situation. He likely envisioned a swift, decisive strike, a resounding triumph that would cement his reputation and put an end to the native resistance. But what awaited him was not a fleeing enemy, not weak victims, but a powerful, unified force ready for total war, led by some of the greatest warriors in their history. Crazy Horse unleashed the full, devastating might of the Lakota and Cheyenne warriors who had long prepared for this very moment. They moved with terrifying coordination, like a sweeping flood, overwhelming Custer's companies from every direction, expertly utilizing the rugged, hilly terrain and dry stream beds for cover and highly effective surprise attacks. This was not the disorganized rabble Custer had mistakenly imagined, but a disciplined and tactically sophisticated army forged in tribal warfare and hardened by previous clashes with the U.S. military. Gall, with the keen intellect of a military genius, meticulously observed the movements of Custer's cavalry and immediately ordered warriors to strike the flanks and rear of the enemy forces. He had precisely identified the fatal weakness in Custer's formation, a dangerously extended and thinly spread line, and exploited it ruthlessly, turning the cavalry's presumed advantage into a crushing liability. Other warriors surged forward, cutting off any escape routes toward the river, trapping Custer's forces in a deadly vice with no possibility of retreat. Rain in the face, a courageous Hunkpapa chief who had been unjustly humiliated and imprisoned by U.S. troops, now fought with an intense fury and a burning desire for vengeance. He had sworn to cut out Custer's heart, and he fought like a man with nothing left to lose, every blow infused with accumulated rage. They systematically targeted the horses first, shooting them down with precision, knowing that dismounted cavalry would lose their mobility advantage and become far easier prey. This tactic not only crippled Custer's forces, but also sowed widespread panic and broke their formation. The thunderous roar of gunfire, combined with the fierce war cries of thousands of native warriors, echoed across the hills. The air grew thick with dust, churned up by thundering hooves, acrid gunpowder smoke, and the palpable, ultimate fear of soldiers facing their imminent demise. The waves of native attack were relentless, a continuous surge progressively driving Custer's forces backward onto a small, steep hill where they would make their last stand. Custer's lines began to break into fragments. His soldiers, many young and inexperienced in actual combat, desperately tried to regroup, but it was far too late. Panic spread rapidly as they realized they were completely surrounded with no escape routes, no hope of reinforcements. Survivors among the native tribes recounted the extreme desperation of the soldiers, ammunition running dry, bayonets drawn for futile last-ditch charges that were ultimately in vain. They fought not to win, but merely to prolong their lives by a few agonizing minutes before being completely overwhelmed. Some accounts, based on battlefield archaeology and native testimonies, suggest Custer attempted to form a final defensive ring on that small, steep hill, now famously known as Last Stand Hill. There, utterly encircled, he and his remaining soldiers fought to the very end, until their last bullet, their last breath. The battle on Last Stand Hill was an unmitigated slaughter, not a balanced fight or a heroic last stand. The Lakota and Cheyenne held an overwhelming advantage in numbers and terrain, attacking from all sides. The bodies of the soldiers were found scattered in clusters, many stripped of their boots and weapons, not out of disrespect or savagery, but because the victorious native peoples possessed so little, and these items were invaluable to them in their nomadic lives and in warfare. Custer's brothers, Captain Tom Custer and Boston Custer, were found lying next to him, along with his nephew and brother-in-law. Not a single man from Custer's immediate command, his 5 companies, survived. It was a complete annihilation, a painful testament to how hubris exacted a terrible toll in lives. Approximately 210 soldiers under Custer's direct command perished. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was over, and with it, George Custer's dream of frontier glory, a dream built upon expansion and oppression. News of the defeat sent profound shockwaves across the entire nation, arriving just days after the United States had proudly celebrated its centennial of independence, an event meant to symbolize its burgeoning power and prosperity. Americans had steadfastly believed in unstoppable progress, in their manifest destiny to expand their territory and civilize the wildlands. But now they faced a bitter, stark truth. Their best forces had been utterly defeated by the very people they deemed savage and backward. This defeat severely wounded national pride and forced the government to rethink its strategy, at least in the short term, before resuming a larger-scale offensive. Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Gall, and their warriors had achieved a feat that few, even among other native tribes, thought possible. For the Lakota and Cheyenne, it was a rare and radiant moment of triumph, a pinnacle of self-dignity and courageous resistance. It was a day when they asserted their right to live freely on their ancestral lands, their right to protect their families and their sacred traditions. It stood as a powerful testament to the strength of unity and an unyielding spirit refusing to bow before a superior enemy. They had proven they were not passive victims, but formidable warriors capable of confronting and even defeating one of the world's most powerful armies. But this victory, however resounding, was but a fleeting moment. It would not endure. The U.S. government, enraged and humiliated by the loss, responded with unprecedented, overwhelming force. They could not tolerate such a defeat at the hands of native tribes, as it would undermine their international standing and embolden other resistances. Within a year, relentless military pressure and economic hardship forced many tribes onto reservations, a process both coercive and brutal. Crazy Horse, tragically betrayed by some members of his own tribe and surrounded by the U.S. Army, was captured and then brutally killed while in custody in September 1877. His death was an immense loss to the spirit of native resistance. Sitting Bull was compelled to flee to Canada with his loyal followers, living in exile for years before being forced to return to the U.S. due to lack of food and hardship, and eventually also meeting a tragic end in another conflict in 1890. Gall, Recognizing the futility of continuing the fight when the U.S. Army had mobilized such overwhelming force and was determined to crush all resistance, surrendered and returned to the reservation. By the close of that decade, the frontier had officially closed, and with it, the era of traditional native resistance. The free, nomadic life on the plains, intrinsically linked to buffalo hunting and the warrior spirit, gradually vanished, replaced by a life confined to reservations where their culture, language, and traditions were severely threatened, facing the risk of complete assimilation. Nevertheless, the legacy of that summer day, of the Battle of Little Bighorn, still resonates powerfully and endures. Within Native communities, especially among the Lakota and Cheyenne tribes, the story of Little Bighorn is passed down through generations with profound pride, serving as a testament to their courage, resilience, and capacity for self-defense. It is not a tale of savagery or irrational violence, as the U.S. government and some Western historians portrayed it to justify their actions and diminish their adversaries. It is a story of defiance, of extraordinary courage, of the indomitable will of warriors who stood for their sacred lands, for their people, and for the fragile future of a culture under existential threat. To forget this, to fail to comprehend the full meaning of that battle from both sides, would be a great injustice to their sacrifices and a significant gap in understanding the true history of the United States. History often remembers those who fell tragically, but we must also remember and indeed honor those who rose up and fought with all their strength, courage, and wisdom for their people, for their right to live free. The story of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, recounted from the perspective of the Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, serves as a powerful reminder of history's complexities and multifaceted nature, of the absolute necessity to view events from multiple perspectives, not just that of the victor, and of the profound significance of the clash of civilizations. It was not merely a battle, but a symbol, a rare moment when the oppressed turned the tide and achieved a resounding victory, however temporary, against an overwhelming adversary. It is a story of bravery, loss, and the eternal, unconquerable human spirit. Let's explore these stories together, not as dry historical accounts, but as vivid lessons about will, survival, and human resilience.